Welcome back to Sahara TV. My name is Mohammed Musah. The Open Society Foundation works to build vibrant and tolerant societies whose governments are accountable and open to the participation of all people. Today we will be speaking to Lora Lumpe, Senior Policy Analyst at the Open Society Foundation, about the Leahy Law, which President Buhari criticized in his recent visit to the United States. Hey Laura, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Mohammed?
Good. So we're just going to start off by asking you if you can describe the purpose of the Leahy Amendment.
Sure. The Leahy Law was written in the late 1990s. It was focused particularly on the security forces of Colombia at the time, and it was intended to allow the United States government to continue assisting Colombia in its war against narco-traffickers and insurgents, a group called the FARC and the ELN. So two different insurgencies. So it was designed to allow the United States government to continue aiding the government forces, but to not aid particular units that had been documented and that the State Department itself believed had just engaged in massacres of civilians.
Okay. So while President Buhari was in Washington, D.C., he made a speech at the Institute of Peace saying that the Leahy Amendment was assisting in aiding and abetting Boko Haram. What is your response to this?
I think that that's about 180 degrees wrong. You know, President Buhari himself has acknowledged that Nigerian troops need to be disciplined in the conduct of the war against the criminal Boko Haram insurgents, terrorists. And so what the Leahy Law seeks to do is to help incentivize that kind of those disciplined, accountable forces that are vital to actually winning the war against the insurgents by winning the hearts and minds of the local populations in which they're operating. So this law, again, which was originally written in the 90s for Colombia, has been expanded. It covers all countries to which U.S. taxpayers are providing assistance. And it says, you know, while we understand there are complicated and legitimate security threats out there, U.S. taxpayers are not going to fund particular units, meaning at the battalion or brigade level, that are well documented and believed by the U.S. State Department to have engaged in massacres, rapes, prison shootings, village razings, that kind of thing. So I think it's just a misunderstanding of what the law does. I think the law is getting blamed for a lot of other policy decisions, perhaps. But I think that the substance of the law itself, I've heard President Buhari support the very same idea that this law is intended to help achieve.
Okay. But don't you think that Boko Haram is perpetrating like far worse human rights violations that the Nigerian military, and that essentially the U.S.'s stance is exacerbating, violence?
No, I don't agree with that. With that latter part, I don't agree that the U.S. stance is exacerbating violence. In terms of whether Boko Haram is perpetrating more killings, I'm not an expert on the conduct of Nigerian military operations. I would just note that the State Department itself in its annual human rights report documented serious missteps by the security forces in the conduct of their war. And all the law requires for aid to be resumed to those particular units that are cut off. So again, this is not cutting off the entire Nigerian military, not even the army, no single branch of the military is being cut off by the Leahy Law, just particular units, brigades, battalions, and maybe rising up to the level of a division if the problems are widespread enough. But it's only saying those units are cut off, and they're only cut off until there's an investigation of the credible allegations that those forces engaged in murder, rape, pillage, etc. It's not in any way excusing the conduct of Boko Haram, but U.S. taxpayers are not, of course, being asked to arm Boko Haram, nor would they. Again, in my view, the idea that this is in any way exacerbating or encouraging Boko Haram is 180 degrees wrong. It's turned on its head. This law is seeking to help Nigerian forces operate like professional armed forces in a way that will gain support and not drive people toward an insurgency.
Okay. Have there been any countries that have a history of human rights violations that receive unfair exceptions from the Leahy Law at all?
The way that the law is implemented is pretty mysterious to all of us. It is implemented by the U.S. government, of course, and not something that we have a lot of insight into. The decisions when a particular unit is cut off, the decisions are not publicized. So again, I think there's been a lot of misinformation around how this law has or has not been enforced in Nigeria. But I think that's a very fair question. I suspect that in certain cases, well, let me back up and say, for the law to be implemented, the State Department has to have credible and specific information about particular units that it's seeking to train or provide assistance to. And so that requires human rights researchers or journalists or someone to have reported that a particular unit has engaged in a serious crime against the people. So I think there are undoubtedly cases where the security forces have engaged in gross crimes, and that those allegations have not been written up and reported and acted on by the State Department. But I'm not privy to how they actually implement the law.
Okay. Finally, I'll just ask you, what would the U.S. government consider adequate action from these certain military units to clean up its human rights records and get an exception from some of the restrictions that the Leahy Law is giving to the Nigerian military?
Yeah, it's not actually an exception. And that's a great question. That's the key question. That's the point of the law, is to try and help incentivize accountability by the partner nation forces, so that the aid can resume and a professional military relationship can ensue. The answer is, I don't know exactly, but the State Department and the Department of Defense have just finalized earlier this year a memo, an understanding between the two of them on what remediation would look like. So I assume it would be things like an investigation of serious allegations and a disciplinary process. So, I know that in Nigeria last year, several troops were court-martialed for mutiny, for an uprising in the Northeast. That same kind of investigation and accountability for widely documented cases of shootings in barracks, burning to the ground of villages, massive rape, those allegations were documented by Nigerian newspapers, as well as local Nigerian and international human rights organizations. So the same kind of accountability process for those crimes, that's what we're talking about, an investigation into whether these things happened, who ordered them, who took part in them, and then holding the responsible parties accountable.
Okay. So thank you so much, Lora. We really appreciate you joining us and clarifying what the Leahy Law is talking about. So thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.
Sure, anytime.
Yep. Okay, guys, that was Lora Lumpe, Senior Policy Analyst at the Open Society Foundation. My name is Mohammed Musah, and stay tuned to SaharaTV.